The United States military, known to some as the world's most powerful armed forces, and to others as an organization that indoctrinates economically disadvantaged people and uses them to violently meddle in foreign affairs with the goal of securing oil for US corporations. I tend to lean towards the latter. In the past month, however, the Go Army YouTube channel released a set of recruitment ads that don't seem to fit with anyone's view of the military. These ads together form the Calling campaign, and they represent a stark shift in focus for military recruitment. Diversity. The ads feature a gay wedding. Most of the soldiers featured are women and people of color. And the focus of the ads isn't on the soldiers' time serving, but their stories before enlisting. Stories like entering the States as an immigrant, growing up in a low-income household, or marching for gay rights. Why were these ads created? How do they operate as media? And what can they tell us about the organization that created them? First, some context for the standard of military recruitment ads. 6 months before the Calling campaign, Go Army released a very different, highly produced set of recruitment ads, dubbed the What's Your Warrior campaign. These ads are certainly very weird in their own right. They are intensely stylized, and digitally rendered almost to look like ads for Call of Duty. And the video game comparison doesn't stop there. The meat of the What's Your Warrior campaign consists of 12 videos, each only 11 seconds, displaying a ridiculously glorified version of a real military job, like surgeon, programmer, drone pilot, or even chef. Except they're given catchy titles. For example, construction worker becomes groundbreaker, or communications officer becomes wavelength. I'm not the first to notice how similar these names are to the names of kits in Call of Duty, like Firebreak or Recon, or operators in Rainbow Six Siege, like Pulse or Castle. The punchy euphemisms and video game-like imagery is pretty disconcerting considering the audience that they target. Clearly, this is the military advertising to kids. Gamers more specifically. That said, the ads do feature a wide range of jobs that don't see combat. Emphasis is placed on the military as a path towards a career in medicine or computer engineering. Either way, this overglorification is borderline offensive considering the real and horrific experiences of some soldiers. And it's been the standard for military recruitment since World War II. That's why it's so surprising to see this replaced with this.
I had such real big dreams. I said that I wanna be a soldier.
So why the sudden shift? Well, it's hard to say. The military isn't exactly famous for being forthright about its decision-making. It could correspond to our recent change in president, but an ad campaign like this wouldn't be greenlit without a decent amount of research to back up its approach. Ultimately, the only reliable resource we have to help answer that question is the ads themselves. While What's Your Warrior focused on the range of military jobs, the Calling campaign focuses on the range of people doing those jobs. The Calling consists of 5 videos, each 2 to 3 minutes of animation with voiceover depicting the stories of real soldiers before they enlisted and why they chose to enlist. The focus is placed heavily on the soldiers themselves who narrate their own stories. Each comes from a very different background, both racially and economically, but they also model different motivations for enlisting. David, the son of an army officer, wants to prove he's smart enough to be a helicopter pilot. Emma, the white sorority girl with 2 moms, wants a challenge to prove herself as a strong woman. Ricky, the Haitian immigrant who walked for miles to get to school in Haiti, wants to defend the wonder of American capitalism. Janine, the African-American singer, wants to be just like her veteran father. Jennifer, who had a rough childhood, just wants to help people. The structure of these ads is clear. Each subject has a different problem, but they all have the same solution: joining the army. These soldiers were obviously not picked at random. If they were, they would most likely have all been white men who couldn't afford to go to college. Instead, the calling portrays a military that is personable, human, and above all else, diverse. I read The Calling as an honest and serious attempt to recruit more women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community into the military. And that's obviously a good idea. Despite what the popular conservative media says, a diverse set of perspectives will almost always lead to better problem solving. But in order to sell their message, these ads have to frame the military and the United States in a really weird way. For the most part, they depict the US in a surprisingly real light, but with one key exception. They depict a United States without history. This isn't exactly a new phenomenon. The Coronet propaganda videos from the 50s pull a similar trick, but for very different reasons. Big Joel did a great video on this, so I'd recommend checking it out. But in short, these propaganda PSAs aim to teach American youth not only about the dangers of drug use, as modern PSAs do, but about how to act in every facet of daily life. They present common problems like feeling unpopular or wondering if you and your partner are ready for marriage, but instead of treating these problems as complicated and situation-dependent, these PSAs present the solutions as a couple of simple, easy-to-follow steps. For example, Are We Ready for Marriage? Features Cupid's checklist that has 3 simple checks. Do you have similar backgrounds? Are you real friends? Do you understand marriage? Great. Now say your vows. Of course, this view of the world is patently ridiculous. There is no checklist to know if marriage is a good idea for you. These videos are able to present such an uncomplicated worldview by acting as if the world did not exist before the 50s. For example, the parents in these films tell stories of dating in their teenage years, except they don't give any indication that they grew up during the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which would severely affect their view on dating. If they discussed the complicated history that led to 1950s USA, they would have to admit that society could be something other than what it is. They would have to admit that it changed and that it could change again. Instead, the overwhelming message of the Coronet PSAs is that this is the way it's always been. The Coronet films had to construct a world without history because their goal was to create a rigid, unified American identity. The Calling has a very different reason. In order to appeal to women and minorities, The Calling must share stories that are relatable to women and minorities, and portray the military as a place that accepts them. The catch is that these groups have not historically been accepted in the military. Although women have always served in the US military in some capacity, mostly as nurses, they've only had the same opportunities for jobs as men since 2016. And in 2018 alone, 13,000 women reported being sexually assaulted while on active duty. Likewise, people of color have faced extreme discrimination in the military throughout history, and undoubtedly continue to face various forms of discrimination in today's predominantly white military. Of course, these ads don't focus on any of those issues, or any issues within the military. Their purpose is to bring in recruits. So instead, they focus on the hardships that women and minorities face outside the military, and act as if there's no question of the military's acceptance, as if it's always been that way. This world without a history extends to the way The Calling portrays the rest of the US too. One of the most contradictory examples of this occurs in Jennifer's video. Jennifer is the daughter of 2 first-generation immigrants from the Dominican Republic. Her video begins with her recounting how she witnessed her father attempt suicide when she was only 4. Jennifer goes on to describe how she lived in a small, overcrowded apartment with 10 family members. The animation shows Jennifer sitting solemnly on a couch as various family members flash past her, across the frame. Jennifer tells us her mother had to work 16-hour days to support the family, and presumably her mentally ill father. These problems and this imagery is intentionally not unique to Jennifer. Jennifer's family was struggling to survive while seemingly very poor, a common situation for first-generation immigrants to the US. It's in the advertisement because of its wide emotional appeal. What is completely absent from the video is any sense of why her family had economic issues, or why they moved to the US in the first place. I don't know the details of Jennifer's story, but I do know that a lot of Latinx immigrants come to the United States because their home governments and economies were made unstable by US military action. The Dominican Republic, Jennifer's parents' country of origin, was occupied by the US military twice in the last century. The history of US intervention in Latin America is far too complicated to tackle in this video, but The Calling ignores it entirely. According to The Calling, immigrants in the US just are poor. It's just the way it's always been. There's no reason why. Emma's video presents a more complicated example of this. Her video begins with her talking about her two moms, and even features her at a protest for gay rights.
I also marched for equality. I like to think I've been defending freedom from an early age.
In a way, this might seem like a rare admission of historical change for The Calling, but I'd argue it only toes the line without breaking its ahistorical view. Notice how literally every protester is smiling in the two shots of the march. No one is angry. The next shot is Emma crying at the doctor's office as she explains how
one of my moms had an accident that left her paralyzed. Doctor said she might never walk again.
Emma's mother works to eventually be able to walk again and be able to stand at the altar to marry Emma's other mom. This story is certainly inspiring, but it handles homosexuality very lightly. Every story needs conflict, but instead of addressing the conflicts that arise when simply existing as a homosexual in a society that has only recently begun to accept homosexuality, the conflict in Emma's video comes from a random accident. In The Calling, homosexuality is smiling at a fair, smiling at a protest, smiling at a wedding. Of course, the story of Emma's mother's accident is probably real, and it's probably an inspiration to Emma, but this story was chosen for a reason. There are certainly soldiers with gay parents who were bullied or assaulted because of their sexuality, but those stories are seldom told, and telling them requires including the context of a society that changes. It requires admitting that that society should change more. Although the world The Calling presents is far closer to reality than the Coronet films ever were, the answer The Calling offers to solve problems is infinitely more simple. Join the army. And therein lies something that, to me, feels kind of malicious. Because of course an army recruitment ad wants you to join the army, but when it positions enlisting as a solution to systemic problems with our society, it makes me wonder what Emma, Jennifer, Janine, David, Ricky, and the rest of the military are actually defending. The predominant story of women and minorities in the United States is one of a system that leaves them disadvantaged compared to straight white men. In order to appeal to those groups, The Calling tells parts of that story, but never resolves it. Because it can't. It must always return to the military's bottom line, and what they are really defending. The status quo. Even before the What's Your Warrior campaign, the Marines launched a much smaller advertising campaign that foreshadowed the contradictions in The Calling. Battle to Belong is a single 1-minute, 15-second ad released 8 months ago. It's the reason I'm making this video, And it's the only one of these ads that Google showed me without me having to seek it out. And it's kind of crazy. Battle to Belong opens with a boy about my age walking through a dystopian street pulled straight from Blade Runner. In front of him, a holographic, illusory version of himself appears, first advertising a shoe, then lifting a weight, finally smiling malevolently as laughing emojis and social media messages flicker around him. One of them reads, "OMG, that's lol," so you know it's pretty deep social commentary. He then proceeds to smash through his holographic alter ego, and the ad match cuts to him falling down in a swamp, I guess? He's then helped up by his fellow Marines, and a triumphant training montage follows. Battle to Belong uses a dystopian future vision of our society to emphasize how important it is to find meaning, and then it offers the Marines as the solution. But its premise is fundamentally flawed for the same reason the calling is. Although the Marines might give meaning to your life while you're serving, the Marines and the rest of the military don't fix society. They have no way of solving the dystopian problem that the ad introduces. That technology is removing meaning from our lives. I said earlier that these ads aren't made without a lot of research backing up their approaches. I wasn't pulling that out of thin air. In the behind-the-scenes video for Battle to Belong, the Marines' director of marketing says,
This was an effort almost 2 years in the making. It began in 2018, conducting research with our contracted advertising agency, Wunderman Thompson, to better understand Generation Z before we take the next commercial into market.
Despite how weird and contradictory and awkward these ads have been, they do have two strong messages. And they aren't about the military. They're about us, Generation Z. The calling shows that we care more about inclusivity and diversity than anyone before us. Battle to Belong shows that as a generation, we're struggling to find meaning. I'm 20 years old. I am the target demographic. And I agree.